But here's what most men don't realize. Waking up tired, dragging through the day, and feeling quietly frustrated isn't just age. It's your body asking a question you rarely say out loud. I'm a urologist, and I've sat across from men like you, listening, advocating, not lecturing. Years ago, an older woman shared advice I didn't expect. Tell me where you're watching from, and if this resonates, like and subscribe. And what she told me changed how I treat men forever. But here's what most people don't realize. The hardest part of aging for men over 50 isn't the grey hair or the slower recovery. It's the quiet feeling of becoming invisible. I hear this all the time in my office. Men don't usually come in saying, "Doctor, I feel unseen." What they say instead is, "I'm just tired," or "I guess this is normal now." But beneath those words is something deeper, a loss of vitality, a loss of attention, a subtle fading of confidence and internal drive that no one ever warned you about. And if you're feeling that, I want you to know this right away. You're not weak and you're not alone. As men age, the way the world responds to them changes. Socially, you're no longer the young provider, the rising force, the one being noticed for potential. Medically, appointments become more transactional, numbers, labs, quick fixes. Emotionally, there's often no space for what you're actually experiencing. I've seen men who spent decades being relied on suddenly feel like no one is really looking at them anymore. And that shift happens quietly. There's no ceremony for it, no conversation. You just wake up one day and feel less visible. What makes this especially difficult is that most men were never taught how to prepare for this phase of life. You were taught how to build, how to push, how to provide. You were praised for endurance, not reflection. So when this identity shift begins, when your energy dips, when your confidence wavers, you don't label it as a transition. You label it as personal failure, or worse, you dismiss it entirely as just getting older, and you move on without addressing it. I can't tell you how many men I've treated who minimize this emotional erosion for years. They'll say other guys have it worse, or I shouldn't complain. And that's exactly the problem. Men don't complain. Men withdraw. They sleep less deeply. They stop initiating intimacy. They lose motivation for things they used to enjoy. They disengage, not because they don't care, but because they don't want to be a burden or appear weak. And that withdrawal has consequences far beyond mood. Here's where the medicine matters. That sense of invisibility, the chronic stress, the emotional disengagement directly affects your physiology. Elevated stress hormones suppress testosterone production. Fragmented sleep disrupts hormonal recovery. Loss of motivation feeds a cycle of inactivity that further lowers energy and drive. This isn't just psychological, it's biological. Your body is listening to how you interpret your place in the world, and it responds accordingly. In my clinical experience, the men who struggle the most are not the ones with the lowest lab numbers. They're the ones who stopped paying attention to themselves years before those numbers dropped. They ignored the early signals, the quiet fatigue, the restless nights, the sense that something felt off, but not bad enough to address. By the time they come in, they're exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. And this is where the first real intervention begins. Not with a prescription, not with a supplement, with awareness. Awareness is not passive, it's an active physiological signal. When you acknowledge that something has changed, your nervous system shifts out of constant defense mode. Stress hormones begin to settle, sleep improves, motivation has room to return. I've watched men regain energy simply by naming what they were experiencing instead of suppressing it. Disengagement tells your body it's time to shut down. Awareness tells it there's still something worth supporting. That difference matters more than most men realize. Aging doesn't automatically mean decline, but ignoring the emotional transition often accelerates it. The body follows the mind, especially as we get older. So if you've been telling yourself this is just how things are now, I want you to pause, not to judge yourself, not to panic, just to notice, because the real danger isn't what most men think it is. But what if I told you the real danger isn't low testosterone, it's what comes before it? But here's what most people don't realize. The moments that change how you see health don't usually happen in an exam room, and they're rarely dramatic. This one wasn't. There was no emotional build-up, no cinematic pause. It was quiet, reflective, almost casual. I was speaking with an older woman, no name, no backstory worth dressing up, just someone who had lived long enough to observe people honestly. She wasn't trying to impress me, and she certainly wasn't trying to charm me. She was calm, observant, and disarmingly direct. And what she shared landed harder than most medical lectures I've ever heard. She wasn't talking about romance or attraction or relationships in the way people usually assume. She was talking about men, specifically men as they age. She said, almost matter-of-factly, that men seem to grow older without ever being taught how to do it. That line stuck with me because the more I thought about it, the more I realized how true it was. Men are taught how to start, how to build, how to push forward, but very few are taught how to transition, how to adjust when the body asks for something different. She pointed out something I had seen clinically for years, but never framed this way. Women, by necessity, are forced to adapt to aging. Their bodies change earlier and more visibly. Hormones shift, energy fluctuates. Society talks about it, sometimes poorly, sometimes well, but it's discussed. Men, on the other hand, are encouraged to maintain the same pace indefinitely, to keep performing, to keep producing, to keep proving. And when the body eventually pushes back, men don't see it as a signal. They see it as a failure. What she noticed, and what I now see clearly in my patients, is that men often resist slowing down, not because they're stubborn, but because slowing down feels like surrender. It feels like giving something up, identity, purpose, worth. So instead of adjusting, they double down, they work harder, sleep less, ignore fatigue, push through discomfort. And for a while that works until it doesn't. And when it stops working, the cost is steep. She described it simply. Aging without adjustment doesn't make men wiser. It makes them exhausted. That sentence changed how I listen to men in my office. Because exhaustion isn't just physical, it's emotional. It's the weight of carrying an identity that no longer fits the body you're in. And men feel that deeply, even if they never say it out loud. What struck me most was how unemotional she was about it. There was no blame in her voice, no criticism, just observation. She said masculine strength isn't about denial, it's about adaptation, about knowing when the rules have changed and being willing to learn new ones. That idea runs directly counter to how many men were raised. You were taught to endure, not to adjust, to push, not to recalibrate. And yet the men who thrive later in life are almost always the ones who learn how to adapt without shame. In medicine, we talk a lot about resilience, but resilience doesn't mean rigidity. The body isn't designed to run the same program forever. Hormones change, recovery slows, sleep architecture shifts, and when men ignore those changes, they pay for it. Not immediately, but cumulatively. I see it in the men who come in saying they can't sleep anymore, or that their energy vanished out of nowhere, or that desire feels distant, even though nothing is technically wrong. That conversation helped me connect a pattern I had been seeing for years. Men don't fall apart suddenly. They wear down quietly. They lose sleep before they lose desire. They lose energy before they lose confidence. And by the time they notice something is wrong, they've been ignoring the early signals for a long time. She didn't offer a solution that day. She didn't tell me what to prescribe or what to test. She simply named the problem in a way I couldn't unhear. And as I thought more about it, I realized that what she said next explained something I had been missing all along, why so many men lose sleep before they lose desire. But here's what most people don't realize. The emotional strain men feel as they age doesn't stay emotional for long. It becomes physical. It shows up in the body in predictable, measurable ways. And the place it shows up first, almost every time, is sleep. This is where that earlier conversation finally connected the dots for me as a physician. Because once you understand how sleep, energy, and testosterone interact, you start to see why so many men over 50 feel run down even when their labs look acceptable. Most men I see still measure their worth by productivity, how much they get done, how long they can stay sharp, how little rest they can survive on. Recovery is treated like a luxury, something you earn after the work is finished. But the truth is, after 50, the rules change. The body no longer rewards constant output. It rewards restoration. And when recovery is neglected, the entire hormonal system begins to suffer. Testosterone production is deeply tied to sleep quality, not just sleep duration. You can spend 8 hours in bed and still be hormonally exhausted if your sleep is fragmented. I see this constantly. Men waking up 2, 3, 4 times a night. Sometimes it's to urinate. Sometimes it's because their mind won't shut off. Sometimes they don't even know why. They just feel alert at 3 a.m. for no reason. What they don't realize is that each interruption disrupts the deep stages of sleep where testosterone is primarily produced. At the same time, chronic stress keeps cortisol elevated. Cortisol is a survival hormone. It's useful in short bursts, but destructive when it stays high. Elevated cortisol directly suppresses testosterone. It interferes with deep sleep. It keeps the nervous system in a state of alert instead of repair. So when men push through fatigue, skip recovery, and stay mentally on all the time, they unknowingly choose stress hormones over restorative ones. The body can't serve both at full capacity. This is why so many men tell me they feel tired but wired, exhausted yet unable to sleep deeply. They lie in bed, their body worn out, their mind replaying conversations, worries, unfinished tasks. Each night becomes lighter, more broken, and over time, energy drops, motivation fades, erectile confidence becomes inconsistent. Not because desire is gone, but because the nervous system is stuck in survival mode. Here's the part that frustrates many men. Pushing harder makes it worse. Trying to outwork fatigue, outtrain exhaustion, or outsupplement poor sleep usually backfires. The body interprets that as more stress. And when stress goes up, testosterone goes down. Erections become less reliable. Morning energy disappears. Confidence takes a hit. And men often blame age when the real issue is recovery debt. This isn't about being fragile. It's about being strategic. Recovery is not weakness. It's hormonal intelligence. The men who regain energy in their 50s and 60s aren't doing extreme things. They're doing consistent ones. They protect sleep. They reduce nighttime stimulation. They respect the signal their body is sending instead of overriding it. One simple behavioral shift can make a noticeable difference within weeks, not months, weeks. When men stop treating sleep as optional and start treating it as foundational, testosterone production improves naturally. Energy stabilizes, mood lifts, sexual confidence often follows. I've watched this happen repeatedly, even in men who thought they were too far gone to feel better. The body wants to recover. It's designed to, but it needs the right conditions. And most men were never taught that protecting sleep is not a retreat from masculinity. It's a refinement of it. Strength after 50 looks different. It's quieter, smarter, more deliberate. And when men embrace that shift, their bodies respond. But this is usually the moment where men feel resistance, because there's one more truth beneath all of this, and it's not the one most men expect. But here's the part most men don't want to hear, and it's the most important. But here's what most people don't realize. The advice that changes men's lives after 50 is rarely harsh, and it's never meant as criticism. It's wisdom. And when I think back to that older woman and what stayed with me, it wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. An invitation for men to relearn something they were never taught in the first place, because most men were taught how to build a life, but not how to sustain one. From a young age, you were rewarded for output, for endurance, for pushing through discomfort. You learned that rest was something you earned, not something you respected. And that mindset serves you well for decades. It helps you provide, achieve, and create momentum. But after 50, that same mindset can quietly turn against you. The body changes, but the expectations don't. And when worth stays tied only to productivity, men begin to feel like they're falling behind, even when they're doing everything right. This is where I see the most unnecessary suffering. Men who have done everything asked of them, yet feel less confident, less energetic, less connected to themselves than they did years ago, not because they failed, but because the rules changed and no one told them. Sustaining health requires a different skill set than building success. It requires patience instead of force, awareness instead of denial, stewardship instead of control. Relearning rest is one of the hardest adjustments. Rest doesn't mean doing nothing. It means allowing the body to complete the recovery cycles it needs to function well. Deep sleep, mental quiet, space between stresses. Men who resist this often tell me they feel guilty slowing down, as if rest somehow diminishes their value, but clinically, the opposite is true. The men who rest intentionally have better energy, more stable hormones, and greater confidence than the men who keep pushing until something breaks. The same is true for intimacy and connection. As men age, intimacy becomes less about performance and more about presence. Yet many men don't give themselves permission to adapt. They measure confidence by the same standards they used at 30. When those standards become harder to meet, self-respect takes a hit. What I tell my patients is this: confidence doesn't disappear with age, it changes shape, and men who adapt to that shift often report deeper satisfaction, not less. There's solid clinical evidence behind this. Men who adjust their expectations, protect their sleep, manage stress and prioritize recovery live longer and feel better doing it. They maintain muscle mass longer. They preserve sexual function more reliably. They report higher life satisfaction, not because they avoided aging, but because they learned how to work with it. Adaptation isn't giving up, it's optimizing. Masculine dignity in this phase of life comes from stewardship, taking responsibility for your health the same way you once took responsibility for your work or family, monitoring energy instead of ignoring it, addressing problems early instead of waiting, understanding that your body is not betraying you, it's communicating. And when you listen, it responds. Intentional slowing is often misunderstood. Men worry it will make them weaker, slower, less capable. In reality, it improves performance. It sharpens focus. It restores confidence. It allows effort to be effective again instead of draining. Health stops being a gamble, something you hope holds up, and becomes a skill you practice deliberately. This is the part most men were never taught, that caring for yourself after 50 is not indulgent, it's intelligent. It's the foundation for everything you still want to do. And if you've been wondering whether you waited too long to make changes, I want you to stay with me. Because if you're wondering whether it's too late, this is the part I want you to hear carefully. But here's what most people don't realize. Feeling behind at this stage of life doesn't mean you failed. It means you reached a point that requires different tools. I want to speak directly to you if you're tired, if you feel disappointed in your body, or if you quietly wonder how things shifted so far without you noticing. I see men like you every day, strong men, capable men, men who carried responsibility for decades and are only now realizing they're exhausted in a way rest alone hasn't fixed yet. Regret shows up quietly at this age, not loud, not dramatic. It shows up as wondering if you should have paid attention sooner, if you ignored signs you didn't understand at the time. That feeling is common and it's human. But regret does not mean it's over. It only becomes dangerous when it turns into resignation. When you start telling yourself, this is just how it is now, and stop responding to what your body is asking for, the truth is, the male body retains an incredible capacity to recover when it's respected, not pushed, not punished, respected. I've seen men in their 60s regain energy they thought was gone forever. I've watched sleep stabilize, confidence return, and vitality improve, not through drastic reinvention, but through small, consistent changes. The body responds remarkably well when it finally feels supported instead of overridden. You are still a protector, a builder, a leader. Those roles don't disappear with age, they evolve. The wisdom you've earned matters now more than ever, but leadership at this stage includes leading yourself well, knowing when to apply effort and when to allow recovery, knowing that strength isn't measured by how much you endure, but by how well you maintain what you've built. I want to be very clear about this. Aging is not decline, it's transition. And transitions require adjustment, not judgment. The men who thrive are not the ones who pretend nothing has changed. They're the ones who acknowledge the change and respond with intention. They adjust sleep, they manage stress, they choose consistency over intensity, and in doing so, they unlock a different kind of strength, one that's sustainable. You don't need to become someone new. You don't need extreme programs or radical overhauls. You need alignment, small steps taken seriously, earlier bedtimes, quieter evenings, better recovery. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of mastery. Strength doesn't disappear with age. It refines itself. And this brings us back to what she told me and why I'm telling you now. But here's what most people don't realize. The advice that stayed with me wasn't complicated and it wasn't critical. It was simple care. She said men don't need to be pushed harder as they age. They need permission to listen, permission to stop proving and start preserving. That wasn't a correction. It was concern, and it closed the loop for me because it explained why so many men suffer in silence when what they really need is guidance. That's why this space exists. If you found something in this conversation that felt familiar, I want to invite you to subscribe, not for me, but for yourself. This channel isn't about hype or quick fixes. It's about steady, honest guidance designed for men like you, navigating real changes in energy, sleep, confidence, and health. When you join, you're not doing it alone. You're joining a community of men who are choosing to stay informed, aware, and engaged in their own well-being. You deserve that. You deserve confidence that comes from understanding your body, not fighting it. You deserve energy that's sustainable, sleep that's restorative, and health that supports the life you've built. Taking care of yourself now isn't selfish, it's responsible. It's how you stay present for your family, grounded in yourself, and strong in the ways that matter most. There's dignity in choosing health. There's strength in adapting with wisdom. And there's real power in deciding that this next chapter of life will be supported, not endured. Stay curious, stay connected, and take care of your health because you are worth staying strong for.